dans les premières rangées. Bienvenue à cette session extrêmement pertinente et intitulée Soutenir la prévention dans les pays à risque, leçons tirées du Sahel. Cette session examinera la nature des réformes et actions essentielles pour soutenir les efforts de prévention et de stabilisation, ainsi que les défis liés à la définition de ces réformes et de leur mise en œuvre. Les pays présentés illustrent différentes étapes du spectre de la prévention en amont, en
of the
Mauritanie,
upstream prevention segment. You will look at upstream prevention in Mauritania, as well as preventative actions in Togo, and we'll take some lessons from the Sahel. We will look at the following topics. First of all, key reforms that build positive trajectories, what works for preventing and anticipating risks, lessons learned from Central Sahel. Then we will look at national prevention strategies to define key priorities in prevention. And finally, we will look at implementation challenges and the role of external support. In order to discuss these questions, we have a highly distinguished panel. Next to me, I am honored to have His Excellency Abdelhachek Sidai, Minister for Economic Affairs and Development at the Government of Mauritania. Over the course of his career, His Excellency Sidia has cooperated with the World Bank, the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development, the Islamic Development Bank, and previously he was Minister for Finance. To my left, we have Dr. Bakari Samb, researcher and director of the Timbuktu Institute. Dr. Samb is one of the world's leading analysts in fragility dynamics, radicalization factors, and conflict configuration in the Sahel and West Africa as a whole. Joining us remotely, we are very honored to have Her Excellency Mick Sandra Ablamba Johnson, Minister and Secretary General of the Presidency of the Cabinet of Togo. The minister was previously Minister Delegate and Advisor to the President in charge of improving the business environment. Also with us over Zoom is Mr. Leandro Santos Sima, who is Special Representative and Bureau Chief of the UN for West Africa and the Sahel. He has over 30 years of experience in government, particularly as a Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, as well as Minister of Health of Mozambique. And then finally, joining us from Abidjan, we have Mr. Ousmane Diagana, Regional Vice President for West and Central Africa at the World Bank. Mr. Diagana manages the World Bank's relations with 22 countries, supervising over $57 billion in projects. And then finally, myself, my name is Elizabeth Hovens. I am now Director for Strategy and Operations in Southeast Asia, but I had the honor and the pleasure of working for a long time in West Africa. We have just a few housekeeping items to provide in a second. We're going to be showing them up on the screen for remote participants. Please be advised that when you are using Attendee Hub, if you need the translation, you can click the translation button. which is on the right, and you can pick your language.
The interpretation, the translation is AI, whereas interpretation is live. If you would like to ask a question or have a comment, put it on the chat Q&A in the attendee hub, and we'll have a moderator for the questions here in the room. For all of you here, as you might see it, the session will be in French mostly, but you have cards on your chairs if you need interpretation. So I'll be brief. We'll start the session. What I would like, first of all, to invite the Vice President, Ousmane Diagana, for his introductory speech. The region for West Africa and Central Africa is in changes with social developments, societal development, economic developments, but also security challenges. And recently, the World Bank Group did modify its strategy for FCV for 2025-2026 till 2030. Sir, in your job as the Vice President for the region, and within the strategy that was improved for FCV of the World Bank, what are the main changes in strategy that might guide the engagement of the World Bank in the region so as to improve prevention and stabilize the situations that are already in conflict? Ousmane, you have the floor.
Ousmane, nous ne vous suivons pas.
We cannot hear you, sir.
Ousmane, il paraît que votre micro est
I was
atteint.
told that your mic is off.
Maintenant, vous...
Now we can hear
Maintenant,
you. Now we can hear you.
Allez-y.
Vous m'entendez maintenant?
Oui, allez-y.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Alors, je m'excuse pour
My apologies for this technical issue. And I would like to say hello to everybody and tell you that Elizabeth Hibbins is a moderator, and she is in the strategy and operation for region, and thus she knows our approach for fragility, conflict, and vulnerability in the sub-region. And I would like also to apologize with my friends, clients and partners, the ministers for the Congo and Mauritania, and the ambassador Simo, with whom I have exchanges that are regular. And I'm sorry that I'm not in Washington today to see you in person and to have a conversation with them directly. Professor Bakidesam is also a friend of mine, and he worked a lot with us recently for preparing our new strategy with the Sahel countries. As Elizabeth said, West Africa and Central Africa in a general manner, and the countries of Sahel in a specific way, have very rapid changes socially, economically, and of course, on the security front. So it is significant to talk about the engagement and the lessons, not only for the World Bank, but also for all partner countries in this geography that is complex, but very significant, especially given the opportunities that are crucial for each of the countries. And I know that the panel will talk in detail about what I just told you, but I have one thing that I would like to underline. The experience in Sahel shows that we have to intervene fast in order to prevent the risk in conflict and facility. And I would like to greet the new strategy for FCV of the World Bank, which is underlining specifically the anticipative measures against risk. So this is a proactive fashion, and we have to avoid retroactive measures, which means that we have to be bearing on data that is solid, and have analysis that will be pertinent of quality, but also of quantity. We think that this is the sine qua non for supporting countries on essential reforms that we might show in the agenda on sectors that are the most significant, both to prevent crises, but also for the sectors that are the most impacted when there are crises. So development, human development, the issues of governance, social contract, but also on all questions of connectivity that are very significant, especially when you look at the countries that are vast countries, geographically speaking, with demographics that are rather not dense for distribution. In the sub-region, we have started working on our lessons, and we are applying them in the dialogue with the countries that are on the borders of the Sahel. For instance, I am happy to see the Minister of Togo here. In Togo, we worked with the government in order to mobilize the allocation for prevention and resilience in order to support innovating initiative in the north of the country. In Mauritania, when we prepped the new partnership framework, we also integrated systematically the analysis of risk and the intervention that are necessary to support resilience, including for the IDPs because of the conflict in the Sahel. The new strategy, the new FCV strategy will have us mobilize tools that are available, and we will strengthen our prevention in collaboration with the UN and civil society that have the knowledge and the experience. I will stop here and I will give the floor to Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Ousmane, for your speech. Now the first questions on the item of essential reforms for prevention and stabilization based on the lessons that we have gotten from the central Sahel. First of all, I will turn to Dr. Samb. You have supported for decades on prevention of conflicts in Africa. In the Sahel, the government doesn't have control everywhere, and the recent events in Mali show again that the efforts to contain the turbulence are more and more complicated. According to you, what are the 5 lessons that we have from the Sahel that are most pertinent for the countries in the Gulf of Guinea, in the Sahel, and even beyond on the whole of West Africa? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I will start with thanking the World Bank Group for having invited me here for this exchange, for thinking and reflecting on the Sahel and the West Africa and beyond. Thank you also to Ousmane Diagana. I would like to mention that for the past few years, he has a Sahel advisory panel so that we are not in a silo and that the knowledge in the region will be listened to and recognized. And this is the co-construction of strategies. And this is most to his honor. And we thank him for initiating these 4 lessons. Yes, indeed. What we might take from the decade and for the past years in the Sahel, first of all, I think we have the 40-year delay. 40 years when yesterday's crises are really within the fragilities of today. Why 40 years? Because we have desertification 40 years ago, and the traditional partners and donors were shrunk by the oil and financial crisis. And then at that time, there was an emptiness that the partners left and others have taken up on it. What we learned from this lesson, we had the adjustments, which was a period that had consequences on the public sphere and the national states. So in the Gulf of Guinea, Benin, Togo, Côte d'Ivoire, these countries are in a turbulent zone, and the lesson in clear the fragilities that we see today might bring about other issues in the next few years if we're not careful, if we do not treat the symptoms thereof. We should avoid to treat symptoms without talking about structural deficit. I also talk about the perception conflict on conflict. So this is the fatal deficit between what is seen internationally and what is the local reality. I think that for a long time there was a gap, a true gap. So there is a difference between the international sphere sees and what we see locally. So for the security, the international engagement didn't win the war against terrorism, nor peace with the local people.
The third lesson could be a strategic mistake that we would have to learn from, and that is the disconnect between Central Sahel and the rest of West Africa, ignoring the socio-historical continua and focusing only on emergencies, forgetting about the periphery. And today, when we talk about spillover, we're paying the price for that. We are forgetting about the socio-historical continua. For instance, while we were focused on Mali, Niger, and Burkina, we forgot that the fuel used by Mujao in Gao was already coming from Benin. We forgot about these continua, and I think that today countries in the Gulf of Guinea are not experiencing spillover from the Sahel. They're experiencing the same trends that existed in those regions, and so that is how we have to read it. And sorry, I know I'm a little long. I'm being a teacher right here, but lesson number 4 for me is the over-militarization. So much so that in the Sahel today, there's something that we have to be aware of. We are seeing that development expenditure is being crowded out by security expenditure. Some countries like Niger are spending over 20% on security versus less than 5% on education or healthcare. And so we have to see how we can review our geopolitical agendas.
Une Kalachnikov n'a jamais tué une idéologie et qu'un soldat.
I often say that an AK has never killed an ideology. If you have a soldier in northern Benin, no schools, no clinics, essentially no government presence, what government is absent? Often, you find the security apparatus present, but the protective layer of the government, so schools and hospitals, are not present. And then I would theorize also the revenge of context. We have a need for differentiated prevention. Let us not be prisoners to classifications that are man-made. Let's experiment with agile solutions for crises. Let's have some reviewable strategies, because often we say, oh, this country is stable, this other country is not, and when you follow this logic, we were talking about Mali, but 10 years ago, we were talking about Mali the same way we're talking about Senegal today. So if you look at the emergency program in the Sahel region in Togo, it's a major effort, but I think we should really capitalize that, revise it, and fully understand the need for additional prevention. And this is true for Mauritania with its mixed approach. The strategy on Muraja, Munasra, and Amhara, the inclusive dialogue. We were talking about the National Peace Building Strategy supported by the Peace Building Fund, and there are some takeaways here, but let us not mistake these for lasting progress if we don't have a renewed commitment to change these paradigms so that most countries can benefit from it. Thank you very much, Mr. Sambe. You have really underscored the issue of timing. You have to get involved early on to work on prevention. You have to take into account historical and structural relationships between countries. And it is very important to focus on development and not just security, and to bring the government to the people. Madam Minister, turning to you now, nowadays the security threats in Central Sahel are moving down towards the countries of the Guinean Gulf. The Togolese government was quick to understand this challenge and implemented measures to prevent and mitigate security risks. So, in your opinion, listening to what Dr. Sam just said, which lessons from the Sahel resonate the most with you in terms of prevention and reform as far as the Togolese government's action is concerned today? Thank you very much, moderator. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Bakari for the quality of his presentation. This really highlights the key takeaways from the Sahel crisis. Listening to him, I wonder if it's still worth it for me to speak. He has kept a very close eye on our measures in Togo. Now, as far as our takeaways from the Sahel crisis, I would like to say that these lessons have nothing to do with theory. What my colleague Dr. Bakari just introduced is in line with the national reality and the government's strategic choices to anticipate and prevent spillover fragility towards coastal countries in the Gulf. We have an overarching strategy with three dimensions. The first one is related to prevention, as the moderator rightly said. Prevention follows an integrated early warning architecture. In Togo, we have an interministerial committee to prevent and combat violent extremism. The goal is to stamp out violent extremism and make sure communities can access the essential tools to fight this scourge. This committee also aims to build cooperation between governments and the people. That is why the committee includes ministerial representatives, but also the private sector, and also the civil society and representatives of churches, so that we can really build communication with the people who are often experiencing the negative consequences of violent extremism. And then we set up an early warning mechanism to prevent and combat violent extremism. And just today I received an executive order from the president, which is now going to regulate this early warning system. It will be implemented by the Ministry for Security and colleagues from other ministries. This mechanism is about training local populations, particularly traditional leaders, the youth, the media, and train them to detect early warning signals to facilitate free-flowing communication between communities and the government. And I can tell you that this system has provided a significant contribution to identifying the people who could be suspicious in various localities. So the government is working on prevention, but also about on a military response. Our government has an operation which is called Operation Condouaré. The goal is for Togolese armed forces to respond to the terrorist threat and to extremist incursions in the north of our country. This includes a social dimension, and we will also be building certain oral drills, which was what we were planning in 2017-2018 before the first attack started. And after these attacks, we started a third domain of action, which is building economic resilience. The situation in Sahel has taught us that crises stem from accumulated vulnerability, such as poverty, social exclusion, lack of public services, spatial inequality, loss of confidence in the government. In Togo, this takeaway is at the basis of our approach for prevention. It is not chiefly military in nature. Our colleague Bakari mentioned it. It was one of the key takeaways from Sahel countries. In some of these countries, the military side of things was overshadowing everything else. there were deficits in terms of the structural causes of fragility, and that is why we set up an emergency program for resilience building and community security. And we received support from the World Bank. I talk about this because as a governor for Togo at the bank, I was the interface between the bank and the Togolese government that was mobilizing resources. The goal was to implement these resources in these projects. And one of these projects was a social cohesion project, the Pozo project, and also another project that came on top of it, although Togo did not seem to be one of the FCV countries. You have to be at war to receive this support, and yet we were the first non-warring country to receive this, and I can tell you that this has provided some very tangible results. And what we've also seen is that where the government is absent, vulnerabilities become entrenched, and so do extremists. And so if we want to increase government presence, we have to invest in various communities, and that is what we have done. Almost 830,000 pieces of infrastructure benefiting 545,000 people in the far north of our country. And then there's also everything related to supporting youth. As you know, when our friends come in, they start by indoctrinating the youth. And so we have to develop income opportunities for women and youth. Almost 5 billion were deployed. Minister, thank you so much. There will be a second round of interventions where we can look into World Bank support on specific actions. Thank you very much for raising these points, particularly the one related to the need to bring the government into these impoverished regions by working with a multi-sectoral whole-of-government approach that is ever so important. And you also mentioned the importance of early warning in order to take agile action. As Dr. Samb rightly underscored, Minister Sidia, now we will hear from you. Mauritania has for many years now been developing its own prevention model in a very proactive risk reduction logic. Today, Mauritania is seen as an example in the region. Mauritania also adopted at the end of last year its first national strategy for peace building and social cohesion. So, in your judgment, which lessons are to be learned from Central Sahel? Which are the most relevant lessons for Mauritania? Which reforms seem most urgent to you?
Thank you. Thank you much. And I would like to thank also the moderator, but also Ousmane Diagana, Vice President of the World Bank, that invited us. And thanks for having Mauritania here. Obviously, I also thank my friend, Dr. Samb, for his brilliant speech and for the books that he has written and articles on Sahel that I read often and I share with my colleagues. Mauritania is protected by its geography because we are not in the center of Sahel. As our Senegalese cousins, we are in the Western Sahel, if you will, which is protected by the geography, and because geography is a protection in that sense. We also have developed for the past few years what Professor Sam told us earlier, a strategy and he told us in Arabic, and it's impossible to translate, and he speaks Arabic, so he will translate in Arabic. This is what I said. So having things on the table, having all the issues to find a solution, and to be clear, and not to have any hidden programs for the people with whom we work. So we are administering the citizens. And thirdly, discussing with the actors. That's the third point. Discussion with the actors is important. Obviously, Sahel is a specific fragile because of the climate, because we are in an area that is next to the Sahara, that is Saharan, and there is no rain. People worked on agriculture and breeding, and they are dependent on the climate. We are also in a region that has a very strong demographic development. Women have children, a lot of children. In some of the countries that you may know, we have 6 children per woman, which is high. So it is a challenge in demographics, in climate, but also a challenge with the legitimacy of the state with the people. Thus, this is going through our presence on the whole of territory, which we succeeded in my country because, thanks to the President of the Republic, the President of our country, and the state cannot, as the professor said, be only an oppression and coercion coercion tool. We also have to bring services as a state so that the community be supportive of the state and the government, and the people think that the government is useful, is more useful than not. So we cannot only, as a government, limit freedoms of the citizens and have taxes and have the monopoly of violence and not give services to the people. So that's what we tried to do. We understood for a long time now that the government also has to have a solidarity policy for the vulnerable people and poor people. So with the World Bank, we implemented before other countries a social contract that identifies the vulnerable and poor people quickly, and this policy was implemented for the past few years. And we have transfer of cash, we have food support in order to help the most vulnerable people and to show that we're not leaving them behind. We also adopted macroeconomic policies that have an impact on the economy with gains for wealth, and that is distributed to the people beyond the demographic development. And we have, except for 2025, our development and growth beyond the COVID, that was 6%, and we have a strong demographic development, 3%. So that's quite strong. We consider that there is a gain of growth that improves the situation of our people. Manifestly, the growth in Mauritania is not enough of distribution, and it is for the people who are on certain regions. The regions are better integrated in the international economy. Right now, the rest of the country is not up to par. We are trying to correct it. In 2025, in December, this national strategy for social cohesion and peace, so it's 2025-2030, will try to have all the lessons for fragility to find solutions, and we have prevention. Prevention is the most important to solve problems or anticipating in issues rather than doing it after the crisis. Thank you, Mr. Minister. We see that we already have the same path that we talk about. You talked about the importance of the positive presence of the government in the vulnerable regions, and I also see that you said, Mr. Minister, that you talked about the dialogue with everybody, all the actors. So that also seems to be significant. Mr. Simao, let's talk with you now. The UN have the national strategy for prevention within the agenda to prevent conflicts. This engagement is formal, is in the new agenda for peace, which is a strategy, and the member states have adopted it. In your mind, what is the role of the international community in the sub-region on the issues of prevention so as to go from development of strategy to their implementation? You have the floor. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, sorry.
Il faut mobiliser le micro.
You might activate your mic.
Je pense que vous êtes encore en mute, Monsieur Simao.
I think you're still on mute, sir.
Hello?
Yes. Allez-y.
Go ahead. Thank you. Sorry. As I was saying, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I have my notes in English, so I will be speaking English if you allow me. No issue. Go ahead. No worries.
Dear colleagues of the panel, and I want to thank the World Bank for the invitation to join this important discussion on trajectory shifting actions to support the prevention in at-risk countries with a focus on lessons from the Sahel. For the UN, trajectory shifting action means acting early, acting politically, and acting collectively to change the incentives that drive instability. It means supporting countries before crises become conflict and before conflict becomes entrenched. The main challenge we have in addressing fragility is poverty. And therefore, what is required is a combination of short-term interventions with the medium to long-term interventions. There are immediate needs the populations are faced with, particularly in the Sahel, where the main problem is terrorism, with the impact of terrorism on the populations, and the need to provide the assistance these populations need. But at the same time, medium to long-term development issues cannot be overlooked, because these are the issues which in the long run will bring stability to the countries. On addressing the immediate issues, a special attention, in my view, has to be given to the youth, because youth, they face poverty, But more than poverty today, they are facing lack of hope. And where interventions are made, are bringing in, as in the case of Togo, the northern part of Togo, the situation is different because these interventions bring back hope that even if the present is difficult, at least the future can be better. So to restore hope among the youth is essential. The second aspect is to develop, it's about development on material aspect of development, infrastructures, but also institutional development. In some cases, it's necessary to build institutions, like other colleagues mentioned about the extension of the presence of the state in all corners of the country, but also to rebuild, in some cases, or in many cases, infrastructure which were affected by terrorism. And thirdly, where institutions exist, promote their development so that they can be more responsive to the needs of the population. So in short, I can see what is needed. The role of the community, the international community, is to work together, each one with its own vocation, to bring short-term interventions with medium and long-term interventions for betterment of the living standard of the population. I thank you, Madame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simao. Et vous avez encore renforcé l'idée.
Again, you strengthen the idea of the timing of measures. And as the minister said, you also underlined how significant it is to talk about the youth and to have a special interest for the young people that are a special group. Now let's have the second round of conversation, the role of the World Bank might have for the prevention of conflict and stabilization. Thus, Dr. Bakary, in our first conversation, we talked about the challenges that are numerous in the sub-region and that it is necessary to have prevention and stabilization as an approach. So for prevention, you have to be adapted to the specific context of the countries. Might you give us the three priorities and reforms that the International Institution for Development, as the World Bank, might have and should support in the sub-region before supporting prevention and stabilization? Thank you very much for your question. I think that when everything is a priority, and I usually say, as in the COVID, why some countries were more resilient, because we were contexts, we had deficits and we managed them rather than stocks that we manage. In this configuration, resilience is more important. But another thing that might be important is to have an anticipation system and for early detection of all the... So we pay attention to the tree that is falling rather than to the forest that is growing.
So we don't really pay attention. We say, okay, this country is stable, our work here is done, and we forget about prevention. And we have to have a much earlier approach.
Retrouver des ciplèves à Saint-Cancé, à Mandouri, ou dans le Pengal, ou dans la préfecture de Thône.
When you see in the various areas that these issues are propping up, what this shows is that we need to take an early approach to these problems. But in addition to the classification we have, we also have to have different categories for countries. Some countries are stable, yet vulnerable. Some countries are being affected by change. And that is what could help us
plus proactif. Je me rappelle d'une discussion
help us
avec
be more proactive. I remember a discussion with a sheikh from Mauritania, and it was a good reminder that the governance issues that we are neglecting are feeding into conflicts. There's a formula in Arabic: the arrogance of injustice and the ignorance of the holy victims. And as soon as this happens, you're going to see some problems prop up. And then, how to have a differentiated and territorially conscious approach.
Et je crois que les présentations, aujourd'hui, on est dans des zonifications.
If you look at the presentations that we have now, we are overly simplistic. For example, we have a very clear distinction between Central Sahel and West Africa, and I think that what we need is well-calibrated interventions based on the actual profile of every one of those contexts. We need humanitarian programs and employment. We can't say, oh, okay, in Mali we're preventing. Yeah, you have to manage security emergencies, but in more resilient regions you have to work on jobs, not just on jobs. Jobs also appear in a secure environment where companies can develop. So yes, employment is a key issue, but we also have to act before that. We need transparency, we need inclusion in at-risk areas in places such as Benin. Then venturing into a third area of priority, how can we build local ownership and regional synergies at the same time? It has been noted that there is a structural gap between international strategic perceptions. When people are on Pennsylvania Avenue, people in Delbagru or in Neama or in Basiknu will not necessarily understand where you're coming from. So I think we really have to break with this gap and understand that one of the key causes of failing top-down interventions is because we are not taking into account local realities. At organizations such as the World Bank, we should probably be constantly promoting local inclusion and ownership in program design and monitoring. And we should also try to develop regional and transnational synergies. If you're working in Burkina Faso today, are you really going to overlook the interplays across borders? I talked to someone from Menaka. I eat Algerian food, I feel Nigerian, and yet you tell me I'm Malian. And so we really have to have these cross-border trends in mind. And it is also a reminder to countries in the region, regardless of the diplomatic issues, whether it's AES and ECOWAS, none of our countries is going to leave West Africa. And so on April 18th, that is why we hosted a reunion in Lomé to understand how transnational these phenomena are. Now, I don't know what mechanism an organization such as the World Bank could use to take this cross-border element into account and integrate it in its territorial development policies. Thank you, Dr. Samb. You are once again introducing the concept of early warnings, local action, understanding local issues, and also the importance of cross-border action. Minister, the World Bank Group had already underscored the need to support prevention in its first FCV strategy, particularly through dedicated funding, as you mentioned, such as the prevention and resilience allocation, and the World Bank has changed its policy towards Togo, providing assistance before the number of victims was too high. I hope we haven't lost the minister. How do you understand the role of the World Bank in Togo to support your respective prevention efforts?
Ouais. Peut-être, Monsieur le ministre Sidia,
Minister Sidia, maybe we could hear from you first. Would you like to answer this question? And then we'll hope that the Honorable Minister from Togo can join us again. Thank you very much, moderator. First, I would say that the World Bank's initiative with an FCV portfolio is a great one. I would like to commend the World Bank and particularly Mr. Diagana for this initiative, for sponsoring and pushing it until it was fully funded and implemented. Sahelian countries are structurally some of the poorest in the world. This is an absolutely core datum that we have to have in mind. In these countries, infrastructure gaps, health coverage gaps, educational coverage gaps are all extremely high. And so, first and foremost, we need resources. And we are counting on the World Bank so that as part of this facility and other World Bank programs, we can have such resources that would help us catch up to some extent. We also need the World Bank to use this Sahel Advisory Group mentioned by Professor Samba to leverage its technical and financial expertise. We need these forward-looking tools, these financing mobilization tools. We need all of these tools so that we can truly maximize the impact of our efforts with partial funding from the World Bank. I think it would also be helpful to think of the Gulf of Guinea and the Sahel's issues as global ones. Just because an issue comes up in one country doesn't mean it won't come up in the neighboring country or even two countries down. Overall, the Gulf of Guinea and Sahel regions have been interdependent historically and also with North African countries. You know that Sahel is a key trade route between the Gulf of Guinea and the Mediterranean. And it explains why, speaking under the control of my friend and colleague Bakari Samb, the first coins ever used in Europe were called guineas. Why? Because the gold that these coins were made from came from Guinea. And Guinea is also the same word, or for the same word, Arabic speakers say Sudan. Similar story. So these are global issues. We have to target these interlinkages.
Depuis la modernité européenne qui nous a atteint depuis le XXe siècle, il ne faudrait pas que cet état
And so this nation state, which has been in our countries just since the 20th century with these European constructs, we would hate to see that overshadow some more traditional and more entrenched structures. You know that Mauritania is a member of ECOWAS and other structures, and I believe that this complementarity on a regional level is a key asset to find truly sustainable solutions to the region's issues. Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. Once again, you underlined, just like Dr. Sam did, the importance of cross-border considerations and even global considerations. Mr. Simon, we have heard a lot of interesting conversation on the need to support prevention efforts and on the role of the World Bank. Listening to this panel, which complementarities do you envision between the World Bank Group and the UN system in order to support prevention efforts by countries such as Togo and Mauritania?
You are on mute.
Sir, you are muted.
Mr. Simon.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you
thank
now. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. As I said in my first intervention, the countries of the region need a combination of short-term immediate interventions with the medium and long-term intervention. The United Nations is better placed to provide immediate support to the populations because it has a network going throughout the country. And one example is Togo, the northern part of Togo, the area of Savannah. I visited that area recently, and I could witness by myself the excellent combination of the UN with the local government, because under the leadership of the government, the United Nations fits in the priorities defined by the government and brings that attention to the population. So we can see the increased resilience of the population and also a decreased activity of terrorism in that area. So it is a proof, evidence that this combination of national and international efforts also can be made. But the needs of that area are much going further than that. So the World Bank, with its capacity and means, can come to complement that so that medium to long-term necessities can be taken care of. And this also is important to bear in mind. In Mauritania, the minister said, is faced with many challenges. But one of these challenges of Mauritania is the burden of refugees the country is faced with, particularly in the area of Mbera, where that area that is transforming itself into another urban area, but without the urbanization which is required. And therefore, in my view, in that area, but also in all other old charge region, the country needs that assistance of providing assistance to that population in need, high-risk population, but at the same time look at what can be done so that in the long run, Mbera doesn't become another source of problem, and the basic needs of the populations are taken care of on national institutions development, but also in terms of infrastructure. Another aspect which I think is important is that this joint work between the UN and World Bank should be spearheaded by the government. So the government defines the priorities, defines the way forward, and our institutions come to back to support the efforts of the government so that a country leadership is respected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simao, for highlighting the importance of government ownership et pour aussi mettre l'accent sur le court et le long terme.
And also for on long term and short term, and how the UN and the World Bank might support governments as a complement in this way.
Je vais peut-être, en attendant que
I might,
la ministre, on espère,
well, the minister might come back to us. We would like to see if there are questions in the room or questions that are on Zoom. Go ahead. Why don't you ask your question at the mic? Might you introduce yourselves? What institutions, your name, and who are you asking the question of? Sapiens Natabai. I am with the bank. I work on projects for the integration of digital activities with the bank. My question will be for Eunice for the Central Sahel. We know that the time that will start now is from July to December, is the time where you have most tempests, difficulties in climate for Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and then for Senegal also, and Senegal and Gambia. These are countries that are affected by these climate shocks. So what we heard earlier is that this should be prevented, could be prevented. We have thousands of tools to do so. We have financing for interventions, but for prevention, we don't have the money. We don't have that money. What is your strategy for the same situation that happened in the past 5 years? I would.
Plusieurs personnes derrière vous.
Donc, juste pour finaliser,
to complete my question, the same places were touched and affected this year, past years, with the same density. What is your strategies so as to prevent this? And what are the tools that you think you might need from us in order to prevent and have solutions that would be more durable? Next question. We have a few questions before giving the floor to our colleagues. Please be brief, very brief.
Hello.
Go ahead.
My name is Mary Apollo. A youth ambassador. I'm a youth ambassador from South Sudan. So I attended the last Fragility Forum, and I get an opportunity. That time they put me in the panel to ask a question about the youth role and the support that youth need. And it's my pleasure this year to have this panel talk about youth interventions and youth role. I mobilize and organize the youth in different, we have chapters in different countries. The thing is that what we need to do in Africa, when it comes to fragility and youth engagement, we have a huge gap. I think what we need to start with before establishing the institution, give youth that space where we can have a dialogue and build that connection and trust between the youth and our countries before we are talking or waiting collaboration from outside. And because youth, most of the time, they face the insecurity, lack of economic empowerment and job within conflict. And they are always quickly to find solutions and come with a strategy. before even a stakeholder will go and act, or international organization or whatever. So in my opinion, and seeing what we need to do, we should start with this initiative and then build that institution, give them the space to come with the strategy that they wanted to do, and the work that they wanted to do, and build it. And I think because until then, the conflict will continue to go around because we don't have the space where they feel safe, where they're feeling included to discuss our conflict, the issues with the stakeholder. Yeah. And then my question is, how can we take that strategy to the next level? We're bringing the 55 African countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to the next speaker. Please be brief and ask a question. Thank you.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Je suis Manuela
Thank you,
Bobaka,
Manuela Bobaka,
République centrafricaine.
from the
Je suis présidente de la
Central
Fédération
Africa.
des femmes
I
et
am
jeunes pour le
president
développement durable.
of Women for Durable Development. I am in a crisis country and I am a young person. One of the causes of conflict in our countries is corruption, lack of governance, lack of equipment, absence of responsibility, which brings about a lack of trust of the people with the government. So I have a question for the World Bank. How does the World Bank measure the progress on governance for responsibility in order to make sure that reforms and funds are contributing to reducing the conflict risks? Second question, that will be for the President. Mauritania, in the Sahel, do you link corruption, governance, and conflict in order to support prevention, of conflicts and stabilization in your country? Thank you. Thank you. We have very rich questions. I will give the floor to the panelists to answer. There is a question on governance that I think is linked to the issues with the positive presence of the government, another question on youth, and another question on the issues for climate shocks yearly in the region. Your Excellency, I will give you the floor first to answer the question that you would like to answer to, maybe on governance, that is linked to the positive presence of the government. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I will start with saying that Mauritania has 300,000 refugees right now, and it is an important responsibility for the country. But we would like to have more resources to help them. We have resources, as the ambassador said, for the United Nations and the World Bank also, given that we will be supported for this, but it's a fundamental issue. We have also the European Union that is supporting us. However, it is a fundamental issue because 300,000 people, 500,000 people that are in camps and that we know of them, others that are not counted. So it's 10% of our people. So that's a very important, significant difficulty. So we have to treat the refugees as we are, as if they were our citizens. So this is the orientation that the President of the Republic decided on. These are brothers that come from brother countries, so we have to offer the same services that the ones that we are able to give to our citizens. As to governance, it seems that I should as I said earlier, to make sure that the government be present on the whole of our territory, because we have zones that are outside of the law or that are not covered by the public presence. That brings about the opportunity to other orientations or other decisions or to terrorists, and creating the out of law areas outside of the law, of the real law. It is significant, as I said earlier, to make sure that the government be not only a repression state, but be a government, as we always said, that would be a protector, and so on and so forth. I remember the theory of the 3 Ps that I learned when I was a student. But still, I think that the government should be a protector with services and make sure that the government be able to open the community of thinking with our government. Our colleague is connected. We might give him the floor, would you? Madam Minister, I hope that you heard the questions. You broached the topic of youth and young people at the beginning of our session, and we had an interesting conversation on the inclusion of youth in prevention and stabilization in case of a security crisis. What is the inclusion of youth in Togo in your eyes? Thank you very much. I think that youth have a crucial role in the crisis, how to manage it. So for the implementation of projects for the economic infrastructure, we have a project that is Fontinga, 200 to have the electricity, so 2,000 francs to have electricity, power, and to pay the rest over 15 years. And a young person came to the committee of the president and said, before I used to close up at 3 p.m. because I didn't have power, I didn't have electricity. Today, with this tool, I can close at 7 p.m. because people come back and they can agriculture from our clients can come later, and I will cover the fund in 2 or 3 years. So this is trust for the young people that can see that they can pay before the end of the contract, but they don't have vulnerability anymore. That's why one of the items for the programs is developing everything that is revenue generating activities to have revenues and be able to give them to avoid that they be indoctrinated. We know the strategy of the terrorists is, I will give you 100,000. You don't have 100,000, but how can you have 100,000 per day? Because I don't need. So the issue of youth is important, and it's an initiative beyond the vulnerable people. You have the employment that is necessary for the, thank you for the initiative of the World Bank, with having in the project resources that will be given to the program for the volunteers of young people in the communities.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre. Peut-être, Monsieur Sambé, est-ce que vous voulez dire quelque chose sur la question de la gouvernance?
Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Sam, would you like to speak to the issue of governance? Yes, the issue of governance is absolutely central. It's about citizens' inclusion. And what we are witnessing today in northern Benin and other areas such as Togo, we saw that these terrorist groups are no longer hordes of combatants coming from a foreign country to attack a government. in the Sahel, we are seeing what we call endogenization of terrorism. These are children from the country. And so we are thinking we have to train our armies so that we wait for the terrorists to come in and we fight them at the border. Except terrorism is already here. So ideally, we should say what our friend from Senegal said. We should avoid having fully integrated citizens and fully separated citizens. Even within a country's borders, there are social borders, social divides. And so young people are really asking what their position is in governance. They're not asking to be targeted by programs. They want to be actively involved in developing strategies. And we really have to meet this double quest that our youths have. They're looking for meaning, for a future, for a meaning to their lives, and they're looking for opportunities, whether these be economic, such as jobs, etc., and others, and we have to bring these together. And this has to come together in national strategies to prevent discrimination. And also other trends that are pushing people into the arms of terrorists. And so this is where our security-based approach is failing. We're using a traditional warring approach for a dissymmetric issue. We're not talking about an enemy at the border. The enemy is within the border. And these countries have to talk to their children, including those that they may see as lost. Thank you, Mr. Samb. Unfortunately, we are forced to close this very rich discussion. What I will take away is several things. First of all, the issue of timing and the need to direct our attention towards early signals, acting on time. We need to emphasize the positive presence of the government instead of just using repression and security. I remember the importance of acting locally and regionally, and also the need for youth inclusion, as well as the importance of dialogue with all these stakeholders. Thank you very much. My sincere thanks, Madam Minister, Mr. Minister, Ambassador Simon, Dr. Samb. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
Non, vous avez été vraiment, vous avez réussi dans votre dans le commencement.